After we posted our teardown of this car, the 2080 Ti FE, we immediately put on some thermocouples, which worked out well because the cooler didn't disassemble very easily. And of course, all of the commenters who've never held one of these in their hands knew better how to take it apart, and actually were wrong. But anyway, we figured out how to take it apart, and that's what we're gonna do today. So the card was already disassembled. In a previous video, we showed the PCB, but the cooler we left assembled. It worked out well, just because there are more thermal pads in there. And so for thermal testing purposes, it made better sense anyway to just test it with that configuration before completely disassembling it. And then we also have before tests as well. So we've got another card for that. We'll be talking about that more when embargo lifts. Anyway though, today we're gonna take apart the rest of the cooler, and there's a trick to it that's very Apple-like in nature, which is why many of the comments suggesting things that we had already tried turned out to be wrong. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li's O11 Dynamic, a case largely designed by overclocker Der Bauer for high-performance water cooling, though our performance testing also illustrated strong air cooling performance. The O11 Dynamic is affordable, high build quality, and offers a unique form factor case with dual PSU support. Buy one now at the link in the description below. So the trick for removing this, you may have remembered that in the sped up footage I spent, well, in real life it was about an hour, but messed around with all different things of this, and what we learned was that if you look closely, you see that this cross beam is underneath this shroud, which is underneath this black piece, and like kind of pulling at the edges earlier of the base plate, or the base plate and the top of the card, we could see that the base plate well, just the base plate because the PCB was gone at this point. We see that this base plate separated as a standalone unit, and that the rest of this, so the heatsink, the shroud, the embellishment here, and this black part, we can see that these all separated as a single unit. The base plate was a single unit, but we couldn't get it apart. And I tried a few things. I tried kind of prying up under the edges of this. You can see it looks like there's a part here, and I mentioned this in the video, it may have gotten cut, but it looks like there's a part you can pull up here. And I've pried at it. You can see the pry marks, but it doesn't come up. And you can get it a little bit, but not much. And then pulling up at the edges of this when the card's disassembled, which we'll go back to that state in a moment, you can see that there was something in the middle holding it together. So clearly there's a screw under here. We knew that. But getting this off was non-trivial, and as I said, it ended up being a better decision anyway for thermal testing because we got the thermocouples in there and ran through those tests. Can't share that data yet, but so the trick is that we will need one of these, a heat gun. And we're going to need a heat gun because the black shroud part here is glued with an insane amount of glue to the next part of the card, the supporting structure of the shroud. So we're gonna need this today to heat up that glue from the outside so that we can then pry it off, because just prying at it doesn't do anything if it's friggin' super glued to the entire underlying structure. It's not gonna do anything, except eventually you're gonna either break your prying tool or start breaking parts of the black shroud, and I wanted to avoid both of those things. So let's get started then. I'm going to redisassemble this card. It's not gonna take long. We won't show it on camera. If you want that, you can check it out previously, maybe a speed up or something, but I need to take it back apart, reclaim the thermocouples anyway, which are on the VRM and the VRAM, and we'll have that in the review. And then we can take apart the rest of the cooler and see what the cooler looks like, because we don't actually know yet. So let's call that time on the time lapse and deal with the thermocouples later. And then we have our cooler redisassembled. So now we just need to start working on heating up that top part after removing the rest of the screws in the cooler. Okay, so now we're gonna set up our heat gun. We're just using a TR Industrial one that I bought and have had for a while now. We can set the temperature on this, and for our surface, we're working on top of a table, obviously, because those are actually required for PC building. The Verge taught us that recently. We didn't know that before. So bullet dodged, already had a table, didn't have to go buy one of those. But we need that, and then we've got our mod mat on the surface. You can buy one of these on store.gamersnexus.net if you want to pick one up, and they are excellent modding surfaces and also pretty damn heat resistant. So that is why we're going to be using it today, to protect the table a bit. And then we're just gonna point this probably right about there, figure out the distance later, and then start prying on the edges. What I may do is is kind of sit that down like that and hold the card above it and just move it around until things start to loosen up underneath. All right, so we're just gonna set this to 220 degrees Fahrenheit for right now, and enough to boil water, so we should be about where we need to be. Let it warm up for a second. So tools I need for the job, I need a prior or two. We got one there. I've got a spudger, and then I'm also going to just put a flathead on our driver, and that's just gonna be for additional prying power, and hopefully we can pry it off as it's loosened a bit and warmed up. So this will take a couple minutes. And I know from my sources here, I know that the glue is just all over that plate underneath. So there is going to be prying involved, it's just we're hoping that the glue has broken its bond. And it has not. So we're gonna take this up. Okay, so we're going to 300 degrees, max speed now. Something's gonna snap. Okay, progress. Man, there's a lot of glue. Okay. Look at all that glue. So there's the trick. Yes, as everyone in the comments said, it's easy. You just put your thumb over here and pull up on the tab. There's nothing holding it down. So this plate, I think I understand it now, and I've done this. Of course, as I've said in past teardowns, I actually don't care how our card looks so long as it still works, and it does. But, and also, just to be abundantly clear, if it wasn't already in the intro, this card has already been thermally tested, game tested, everything's done. So this card is done. We don't need to worry about it anymore. But anyway, so what we've got is a plate that separates, and this is not, it didn't break, it actually is intentionally, you can see it's a clean cut, intentionally separates from another plate, and now I think I understand a way to do this. So in the future, it looks like prying under it and pushing against this is ultimately what freed it. And I mean, I chewed up the whole outer side, don't really care, but you know, this is what happens when there's no there's nothing online for us to look up. We just got to figure it out. So figured it out, but you can push up from under, and that'll crack it, along with the heat gun at it was about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 500 maybe. So that cracked it off and separated it from the underlying plate, which is still intact, shockingly, which has an LED cable under here. So prying on this side, I eventually stopped because I knew there was an LED over there, and we'll talk about that more in a moment as well. There's some interesting news there. But got that off, tons of glue on it. Is it still hot? Still pretty hot. Electronics, not hot, actually. The metal plate absorbed it all. Or the other plate. Is this? That's actually metal as well. I thought that was plastic. So there you go, it's metal plate, not plastic. Stand corrected there. Not sure what that is. Have to see the underside. But anyway, we've exposed 4 more screws. And now we can see the rest of this thing. So let's finish pulling this apart. Let's see what else is underneath. First thing I want to know is what's going on with the LED. Because when you plug it in, as you've all seen in footage from NVIDIA's own Gamescom event, the LEDs are green, but the cable is capable of RGB. So is there an RGB controller under this plate? That is the question I have next. The secrets of the NVIDIA Founders Edition series cards. These are really stuck in there, so let's just leave those in there for now. At this point, I think, man, this is so scratched up, but it's fine. Still really hot, but I think we can start separating it. No, there's one more screw. One more screw. Okay. There we go. It's all falling apart. This is really gonna suck to reassemble. Oh, God. So, as the engineers we spoke with said, the vapor chamber is soldered to the fin stack, but the fin stack and the vapor chamber are not soldered to the base plate. Is this a plug? No, that's glue. Okay. Nice. So we've used glue to hold some of the cables in. Yep. Okay, there's more screws. So to get this cable through that hole, there are 2 screws on the other side holding in a retention plate. Man, this is insane. So they went from like 55, 60 screws on one side to having even more screws. So far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus that bar, 8, 9 more screws. So we're well into the 60s for screw count. This is like completely crazy, the amount of screws used for this card. This is why it costs an extra $100. It's not because really of performance or anything, it's because they used 1,000 screws for who knows what reason. Good thermal pads though, very good thermal pads. We'll be replacing those, but the card's already tested, so that's fine. Okay, so there's a base plate. And not much to see here. They've got the same thermal pads that they had on the other side, and like I said, we'll be replacing these now. I do have another card. I actually have several more cards, so that's all good. And then we have just an aluminum base plate, and that's it. And that contacts with the vapor chamber directly, which is, so there's a vapor chamber here. That's what this big chamber is, and you can see that tab on the end is the dead giveaway that something's a vapor chamber. Looks like a tiny heat pipe. It's actually part of the vapor chamber where it's closed. Then we have the nickel-plated copper cold plate here, which is exposed through the other side. There's actually a marking where this thermal pad goes. I'm not sure what that is for. Like I'd have to look at the PCB to figure out what that's on top of. But and then, which is probably VRAM, cut out here for air. So I guess some air actually does get into the hole, not a whole lot, but it's right over the I/O side of the VRM. So some air can get down there, some air can get down into the base plate anyway on the non-I/O side of the VRM. And there's the top of the fin stack. That's pretty cool looking. So we have some typographical changes. You can see the ups and downs where it cuts out for either airflow reasons or to connect with the cooler above it, because that goes down into there. So there's the topology of the aluminum heatsink. It is, to give NVIDIA credit, this is the biggest heatsink they've made in recent years. Actually, in any cards I can remember, this is the biggest heatsink NVIDIA's done, which is because they need it on these. So anyway, that's the vapor chamber, that's the base plate. And now we get down to the rest of it, which shockingly somehow still has more screws. So we're into the 60s at this point. And then we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. What the So there are, I think that's it. I think that has to be it. Looks like 13 more screws. So NVIDIA's into the almost or probably into the 70s with this cooler design. 70 screws. How do you have 70 screws? Look at any 10 series partner card, even 2 slot cards with 2 fans, and it's like 6. And so I think the reason they do this, other than maybe over engineering or something like that, but I think if there's an actual reason, if we're going to give NVIDIA the benefit of the doubt and assume that there's a reason to have 70 screws, and there probably is, part of it is probably because of the vapor chamber design where there's absolutely zero airflow other than the holes we've just shown down to the PCB. and that would require very tight tolerances between all of the different parts. There are a ton of parts on this thing. Let's just look at, there's a top plate, there's the plate under it, there's a PCB for RGB LEDs, which are actually just green right now, but this absolutely supports RGB. It's got a controller for it. So this is an RGB LED that they've, for whatever reason, limited to green. But and then, so anyway, top plate, plate under that, PCB, embellishment here, shroud itself, fans, of course, need screws. Base plate needs screws, cooler needs screws, back plate needs screws, I/O needs screws. So there are a lot of screws holding this thing really tight together. It does honestly seem excessive, but so be it. And then for the fans, what are they? They're using AVC fans. These are 12 volt, 0.6 amps, ball bearing fans, and they are, if you're curious, a model DAPA0815B2UP001, if you wanted to know what they are. And those are AVC ball bearing fans. As for the rest, anything special here? No. Cable, LED cable, which is, again, shockingly still intact. And that's it. Man, what a pain that was. And there are no more thermal pads. So lots of thermal pads, lots of screws. There's the Founders Edition cooler. That's the 1080 Ti, or 2080 Ti, excuse me. And now I guess it's time to, well, we have a plan for this. We have a plan for the PCB that does not involve putting this cooler back on it, which is another, there's more, oh yeah, those are the ones I removed. Okay, cool. So we have a plan for the PCB. It does not involve putting this cooler back on it. And that plan is something that the longtime viewers of the channel will be familiar with. So you'll be seeing one of those videos again pretty soon. And if you don't know what it is, keep an eye out for post-embargo. We've shown you everything we can at this point under the review embargo, but now performance data must wait. And that is the only thing that we really can't show yet is performance data. So yeah, that's the card. I mean, it's crazy. It certainly is high quality insofar as its construction. I'll give NVIDIA that. This particular unit it's not really so high quality anymore, but high quality construction. Completely crazy assembly. They really want to keep you out of this thing. I mean, getting to the PCB is not hard. If you want to put an EK water block on the PCB, it's just screws in the back. It's these. So if we get a shot of those, that's the pile of screws you are removing to get into the PCB. It's not impossible. Actually, some of them you don't even have to remove. These silver Allen key ones, you don't have to remove those. So anything that's in the cooler does not have to come out. It's the cooler itself that NVIDIA really wants to keep you out of for some reason. I don't know why they used glue here. I guess if we're to assume that it is for a valid reason, it's probably because it's prettier, and that seems to be what they're going for with this. I mean, there are no screws in that, so yeah, I guess it looks better. Maybe that's why. Otherwise, I don't know. RMA will be a bit higher because you're not really going to be able to clean out these fins sufficiently. The best way to clean this out, if you buy one of these and you don't put a water cooler on it and you just leave the stock cooler on, the best way to clean it is going to be to get an air compressor and blast it into the fans, maybe hold the fan, blast it in there, or blast it in the sides. And that'll be how you clean the dust out of the fin stack, because otherwise it's completely inaccessible. So if I can just make a point here while we have this disassembled, it took this much effort to get to here. And then there are technically some of that stuff you could skip, but if we're being realistic, you should separate the PCB and everything else just to keep it clean and make sure no PCB components get damaged if you want to service the fans. So, and actually, I think you might have to pull it fully off anyway, but actually, yes, there's a lot to do. But anyway, if you want to service the fans, here's the point I want to make. Servicing the fans requires all the work we just did. It requires that pile of screws. It requires the other assorted screws lying around the table. And it then requires taking these three out, one of which is under a cable for the fan. So you push that out to the side. You have to lift this gate a bit, push it over there, and then 3 screws here. So if you buy one of these, hope that you never have to service the fans, because it's not going to be something, if you really have to, honestly, as someone who just took this apart, if I had another video card lying around and could use that for a week, or well, 2 to 3 weeks if we're being realistic, I'd rather send the cooler in for NVIDIA to deal with in the warranty department. Because if you have to service the fans, this is gonna suck to get in here. This is like, it's just buried. There are no screws under there, fortunately. It's just the back of the hub. But yeah, all of that, then 6 more screws. You can buy the ABC fan online, I'm sure. There are similar fans, if not. But, and then you have to reassemble it all. And in that process, you'll have to replace half the thermal pads because they get ripped apart when you're disassembling this thing. And although you can remove the plate in a cleaner fashion than I did without scratching it, it's likely that most users are going to scratch it because most users aren't going to know what they're in for. So this design, although it looks pretty, I would have to say is non-functional insofar as its serviceability, and repairing this thing, even cleaning it, is going to suck. But they do have a fairly high IP rating for dust resistance. It's just that dust will get in there. It's a computer. It's going to do that. So cleaning dust is going to be hard. Replacing the fan is going to be hard. Not the best design for serviceability. The board partners have really got this down a lot better. It seems like NVIDIA just doesn't care about that aspect, or they didn't consider it. They're more focused on everything else. So that's it. That's the cooler. For everyone who thought it was as simple as just prying it off, there's a lot of glue under there. Things we've learned. So if you want to remove this, I have learned on your behalf, because there is not a pool of evidence or information on Google just yet, since not many people have these. Things we've learned, prying under here, it got me to the end goal. Obviously, it made it ugly. The difference is I don't care, and you probably do. And this is going to violate all kinds of warranties. There's no way this is covered anymore. And it's pretty obvious that I pried at it. So what we've learned then is that heating it definitely to like 500 Fahrenheit, the gun's in Fahrenheit, I don't know, sorry. So heating it around there, and then use a spudger, like the really thin one I was prying with earlier, this thing, use something like this. This is in the iFixit kit. And instead of prying at the sides here like I was doing, try and pry at the borders on this part. Now the problem is you're not going to be able to reach any of the glue. So because you can't reach the glue, it's really just going to be, so there is an entry point here, but if you just heat up the glue, that'll be the best. And then if you need to pry and pop, like this thing eventually popped off because I was prying under it. And so the screwdriver was coming in at an angle through this chamfered edge here, where we thought it was originally like a thumb pole pry socket area. So you shove the screwdriver through there, and then you're trying to pop it up through that hole in the middle. And that will apply upward pressure and push the plate off. Now, to get it to that point, it is advisable to heat it up. And now that you've seen me go through it, hopefully you can do the same without scratching up the card. Like I said, though, we're going to move on from this cooler to something bigger and better. So check back for that content. Should be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Make sure you go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up our mod mat like the one you saw in this video. Pretty heat resistant. It is an excellent building surface, high quality materials, and 4 feet by 2 feet in freedom units, since we're using the theme of Fahrenheit anyway. So that's it. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.